insult farmers in the South, who usually had sunburned necks from being outside all day and, having to work. You worker, why don't you go work some more? All of these terms are rooted in classism, and since classism and racism often go hand in hand, you might be wondering, why didn't this oppressed underclass of poor white people join forces with the oppressed black people? Well, at one time, they actually did, and the white elites were terrified that these groups would eventually overthrow the existing power structure, because that almost happened. During Bacon's Rebellion, white property owner Nathaniel Bacon united slaves, indentured servants, and poor whites in an uprising against the upper class. Together, they burned down the Virginia Capitol. Ah, Bacon, bringing people together since the beginning of time. They eventually lost, but instead of realizing that oppressing people was horrible and that everyone deserved to be treated like a human being, the upper class instead stopped having white servants altogether and only relied on slaves. To make matters worse, they literally invented militia jobs for poor white people to police slaves. As Michelle Alexander points out in her book, The New Jim Crow, this not only eliminated the risk of an alliance between black slaves and poor whites, but it also meant poor whites suddenly had a direct stake in the race-based system of slavery. Poor whites weren't any better off, but hey, at least they weren't black. And unfortunately, this strategy has worked for most of American history. Yep. So are terms like cracker, white trash, and redneck racist? Well, no, they've been racialized, but they're not racist. They were created and used by rich white people to disparage poor white people, not because they were white, but because they were poor. And while racism and classism often overlap, racial prejudice frequently exists outside of class. Remember, you can change your class, but you can't change your race. Wealthy and accomplished people of color still encounter racism. Just a few years ago, multi-billionaire Oprah Winfrey was in an upscale shop in Switzerland and was told she probably couldn't afford one of the pricey handbags she was looking at. That's because the shop attendant just saw a black woman in the store and not mother Oprah. But look, I'm not giving anyone a pass on name calling. Even though these insults aren't racist, it doesn't mean they aren't hurtful. And that's because they promote a long history of class-based bias. Classism of any kind is divisive and takes attention away from the real problem, that people are still struggling all over while the rich get richer. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time right here on Decoded.